Hey everyone, it's Mr. Fox. Today we're going to do a teardown and GPU repaste on the Alienware 18. So let's go ahead and get started. On the bottom side here, we're going to find 3 screws to remove the lower cover. Go ahead and zip those out. It's really important to make sure that you're using the correct size screwdriver. If you use one that's too small or too large, it's going to damage the heads on the screws, and when you go to put them back in or remove them at a later time, they'll be difficult to remove. The screws are very hard, so they're brittle, and using the correct size screwdriver helps keep from damaging the slot where the screwdriver tip fits in. The screws on the bottom have a finished look to them, so you want to keep them separated from the other screws. They look nicer, so that just unsnaps. The second half of the cover slides forward away from the back plane on the laptop and just lifts off. So we have 4 display hinge screws on the back, and then there's 3 additional screws, 2 on each side and 1 in the center, that are all a longer screw. I'll show you here in a minute what I mean. They're about twice as long as the rest of the screws, so you want to keep those separated. We've got a hard drive here that's in the normal optical drive bay. It's an option from Alienware to have another hard drive there. We've got our hard drive caddy over here, and then our battery in the middle. All of these items have screws underneath them, so we'll be removing them to gain access to those screws. So again, the ones in the display hinges, the first set of screws, the 3 in the center of the chassis, and then those on the display hinges are longer. And I'll show you here. It's very hard to mistake them. The important thing is to remember where they go. I'll take out a shorter screw here so you can get a visual. I'll set those side by side and you can see what I mean. So keep it in your mind where the long screws go and the short screws go. The long screws go in the back half of the laptop and the short ones go in the front half. So let's take out the rest of the longer screws. I recommend using a magnetic screwdriver. If you drop screws in places where they shouldn't go, it can be a real pain. It's not like you're going to be rubbing the screwdriver against your hard drive or anything like that, so it's not going to hurt anything to use a magnetic screwdriver. You don't want to drop them into places where they're hard to get at. If you haven't already done so, be sure to download and look at the Alienware 18 Owner's Manual. Dell has done a fantastic job on their owner's manuals, and they have simple step-by-step instructions for removing different components. This video is just to supplement that because some people are visual learners. Some of you may be fearful if you've never taken apart a laptop or even a desktop computer. It can be pretty intimidating. So my intent here is to supplement that manual and show you how easy this really is. Unless you're an accident-prone person that breaks everything they touch, if you use the right tools, just go slow and easy. Don't force anything, be gentle. You won't have any problems. So we're taking out the long screws are out, now we're taking out the shorter screws that are in the battery. Again, all of these shorter screws for the most part are the same. Lift that battery out. There's 3 screws that are underneath the battery, and there's 1 screw that's underneath the hard drive caddy. There's a cable that you just lift off. It's a little handle. You pull up on it. SATA cable for the hard drive. take out or loosen the 4 screws that are on the hard drive caddy. Those are set in rubber bushings to help keep down vibration. And you'll just lift that out of there. Oops, we got one screw that's not out all the way. Just lift that right out. There's one screw that's underneath here that we need to access by removing that. The screws that hold down the hard drive that's in the optical drive bay are smaller screws. They're like the same size as what holds in your SATA or your Wi-Fi card. That's the exception to all the screws being the same diameter. It's not hard to keep them separated as long as you remember where the screws go. It's not a big deal. If you're forgetful, you might want to use some different cups or something and put a sticker or label on them so you know where they go, or a piece of paper with writing on it that you can set the screws in different piles. Here again, we're going to unsnap this SATA cable. It's got a little handle. Just lift it straight up. We're going to take out the 4 screws that hold the third hard drive that's mounted in the optical drive bay. Again, these are tiny screws. They're the same thread size as what you'd have in your SATA or your Wi-Fi card. Underneath this drive, whether you have an optical drive or a hard drive, there are some ribbon cables that need to be disconnected. So that's also a reason we have to remove this. So those 4 screws are out. We're just going to lift that hard drive right out and set it off the side. And here's these ribbon cables that I was talking about. They're exposed now. There's a couple of screws under here. I already took one out to show you the difference in length between the screws, so we're only removing one right now. These ribbon cables have a connector with a flap that folds down. On the left side, there's also 2 ribbon cables that are near the hard drive. They have a different type of connection. Those you actually lift straight up. Be gentle with them, they can be broken easily. And then the ribbon cables on the opposite side have a little flap that lifts up and kind of hinges upward, and that releases the cable. So we're going to disconnect those. Just get your fingernail under the black flap, lift it up, kind of hinge it away, and that cable comes loose really easy. We'll do this other cable. Same exact process. And then this third one off to the side. We'll do the same with that. Just lift up the little tab, hinge it upward. Then the cable's released. You also have to remember to eject the SD card blank. If you don't, the palm rest will not come away from the chassis, so pop that out. We'll go ahead and release these 2 other ribbon cables. You can use something gentle like a little plastic pick tool to lift them up, or you can use your fingernail. Alternate from left side to right side if they don't want to move. Very gentle, because these are fragile and they will break, but once you lift them up just a tad, they will stop. Don't force them. They'll only move like a 1/16 of an inch. Very little movement, just enough to release the cable. If you take it beyond that point, you're going to break off the little ears that hold them in place. So I'm going to use my fingernail and just lift straight up on it. There you go, it's released. So we're all done on the bottom side. You got your MSATA card here. You've got some RAM slots on the bottom. You have your fans for your CPU and both of your GPUs. And then we're ready to flip it over and continue on. Whenever you're cleaning your system, I recommend that you take those fans out, give you good access to the heatsink radiators to clean them out. Alright, getting this palm rest off. If you do it the right way, it's very easy to remove. If you do it the wrong way, it's difficult. I'm going to show you the easy way. Start at the back, just get your fingernail under the edge of it and lift straight up. Do the same thing on the other side. There's clips along the sides and in the front that will come unsnapped as you lift it up. It may take a little bit of effort the first time, but you just lift it straight off. Couldn't be any easier. Alienware 18 is a pleasure to work on. It's very simple, very easy to work on, very user-friendly. We've got some more display hinge screws. We also have our Wi-Fi antenna wires that have to be removed. There's a guide or plastic channel that they fit into. It's got one screw that holds that on. There's also a wire that if you have a wireless HD transmitter would go in the DMC slot. There's a wire for that. And all those wires feed into the display panel. So there's one screw on the outside to remove this guide. The guide fits into a little channel on the hinge. So there's two screws on the left side display hinge. I'm going to zip both of those out. I'm going to stand up here so I can see straight down. Can't see that screw sitting down, so we'll take both of these screws out. Again, these are the longer screws like what we saw on the bottom. We're going to take the one screw out of the plastic wire guide that's for the antennas. This little plastic guide slides into a slot in the right display hinge. After you take the screw out, lift it straight up and then slide it out and away from the hinge. As you tear it down, you'll see what I'm talking about. It'd be hard to take a good image of it on this video, but just pull it straight out. That's loose. And then we have one screw on the right display hinge. So we're going to take off our SLI bridge cable. It's got a little handle. You lift it up, straight up, unsnap it. The right side slides underneath the hinge in a little groove under there. You'll notice I put some thermal pads on the bottom of the SLI bridge cable. That's to protect it from the heat sinks. They lay on top of the heat sinks, and that just helps. My hope is the cable will last longer by it not getting as hot. So we'll disconnect the LVDS cable. It's got a little handle. Just lift it straight up, and the webcam cable, and then lift the panel right off, right out of its hinges. So really, that's the teardown, which that took us less than 15 minutes with me explaining as we go along. We've got some RAM slots. We've got our video cards on the outer edges and the heat sinks. We got the CPU right in the middle. I recommend that if you repaste that you leave the video cards attached. There's two screws. Leave them attached to the motherboard and just take the screws off on the heat sinks. There's 4 screws. The PCI Express slots I'm touching right now, they're black plastic. The cards have to be seated squarely in there. So if you take the 4 heatsink screws out, use a plastic pick tool and just pop the thermal pads stick sometimes, so you can just use a plastic pick tool, twist it, and it'll cause them to come loose. The pads will turn loose from the GPU, and you can repaste with the card still on there. If you take them out, you run the risk of electrostatic discharge to the cards. You don't want to get anything on the contacts, and getting them to reseat correctly sometimes they're kind of finicky, and when you go to boot up the computer, it'll beep and you'll have a black screen. You'll have to go take the thing apart again, reseat the GPUs. It's just better to leave them in. So that's what I recommend. They have some little metal tangs on the side. I'm going to show you in just a moment, but the metal contacts that are in there are concealed inside the black plastic. The metal tangs help you keep it aligned. So we're going to go ahead and take these two screws out so you can see how to remove the GPU and heatsink as an assembly. So those are out, and the GPU is going to hinge upward, kind of like a stick of RAM, where it just lifts up. It's kind of springy and bouncy right now. Lift it up at an angle to release the little tangs on the side, and then move it. You can just lift it straight out. Those two little metal tangs on each side have to be lined up with the GPU with the card fully seated. If they're not, and you try to push the card down, it'll break. So just slide it out, and it's released. And that's all there is to it. You don't want to touch any of these components, the contacts or any of the surface mounted components. You want to avoid contact with them, as well as the contacts in the PCI slot. You don't want any body oil or dirt or anything on those, and you don't want to subject the card to electrostatic discharge. So use something other than your skin, a cloth or a paper napkin, to wipe off the contacts from any dust. We're going to put it back in. So you hold it at an angle. There's a slot in the middle, just like a stick of RAM. Once it's seated all the way, the contacts are going to disappear inside of the black plastic housing. The little tangs will be lined up, and the card will lower down without any kind of resistance. If the card feels like it doesn't want to lower down all the way, it's not in the slot correctly, and you're going to break something, so don't force it. That's all there is to the removal, but we're going to finish this job with the GPUs in their sockets, as I recommended to begin with. So let's take the 4 screws out on the primary GPU heatsink. These normally have little retainers on them, but the newer systems, instead of having a little metal C-clip, have a plastic retainer, and they don't last. So the screws are loose, they're not captive anymore. That's why I'm setting them off to the side. Normally they would stay inside of the little spring metal arms that fasten the heatsink to the GPU. So the 4 screws are out, and use a plastic pick tool to stick in there and twist to get the thermal pads to turn loose. And we'll just lift that heatsink right off. And that's it. You notice that the thermal pads for the memory stayed on the GPU, as well as one across the top, but these other pads stayed on the GPU. That's fine. Just leave them there. If you ever replace the thermal pads, I recommend that you apply them on the components of the GPU. That way you know that they're properly aligned. If you try to apply them to the heatsink, when you go to put it back on, they may not be lined up with the components the way they should. So by leaving them on the components, there's no doubt that they're in the right spot. So that's what I recommend with regard to the pads. So we're going to have to use some rubbing alcohol and some cotton swabs to clean up these GPU heat sinks here in a bit. Set that off to the side. So basically that's how you remove the GPU heatsink. Let's go ahead and get some rubbing alcohol. Let's put a little bit in the cap. Get a cotton swab. We're going to clean this up. This GPU has IC diamond paste on it. It's a really good paste. Some people complain about it scratching. I've been using it for about 5 years and haven't had any problem with scratching. If you go to remove the paste, if you let it soften with the isopropyl alcohol, it'll soften up the paste and turn it to almost like a liquid, and you can get it off without causing any kind of serious damage. Any paste is when you remove it, there's going to be some type of minor scratching just because you're dealing with a shiny surface, and when you rub a shiny surface with it, just about anything, you're going to have some hairline scratches. These are not deep enough to cause problems with cooling. Just use a liberal amount of the alcohol to soften the paste, and then you can just wipe it right off with the Q-tip. So here we go. If you notice around the perimeter of this card, there's a black shield. It's around the die where I'm removing the paste right now. These are Clevo video cards. The Dell video cards do not have that black shield. There's some surface mounted components that are exposed. I'll show you that in a minute whenever we get ready to go back with it. But you don't want to touch those components. They're delicate, and they're also subject to electrostatic discharge, so leave those alone. So we got that pretty well cleaned up. We're going to wipe off the residual liquid with a paper napkin. Whatever you use, make sure it's lint free. If you use a paper towel rather than a paper napkin, they tend to have lint. So does a cloth, unless you use a microfiber cloth or a lint-free cloth. You don't want any kind of fuzz on the surface that would interfere with the contact between the heatsink and the GPU. It needs to be spotless. So we're going to go ahead and wipe off the GPU heatsink that had the alcohol in it long enough where it'll wipe right off without any effort. There we go, nice and clean. Ready for paste. I'll go ahead and give it another once over since it had a little bit of a residue on it. I'm going to make sure that there's no residue of any kind left. Clean it all off around the edges. We're going to use Noctua NTH1. It's not my favorite paste. It actually does okay on GPUs. I prefer IC Diamond or Liquid Ultra because the NTH1 is not very durable on an overclocked CPU. But the GPUs, CPU, I would be using Liquid Ultra. I'm out of it, and I don't have any more IC Diamond. I have to order some, so we're going to use this NTH1 on the GPUs. We're going to use a small dot in the center that I'll demonstrate how to apply that. This is about not quite the size of a grain of rice. Maybe about as big around as a BB and not as tall, so I guess it depends on how big the grains of rice are, but it's not very much. I'll give you a close-up there. It's a minuscule amount. That's going to be enough. It'll spread when we put the heatsink on, and it will cover the die. You don't want a lot of extra paste squishing out the sides because it makes a big mess. Again, we're going to leave our pads where they are. They're already aligned in the right spot. We're going to, if we were putting new pads on, we would put them on the components, but these came apart. All the pads stayed in place, so we're just going to set this right down on top of the GPU and cinch it up. Just get it lined up and press down. And then we're going to start all 4 screws so that the threads are engaged. And then we'll, after we get all the threads started, we're going to tighten them down in an alternating crisscross pattern so that the pressure is even on all 4 corners. You don't want to cinch these down really tight. It doesn't serve any purpose. These are on spring-loaded arms. Once the screws bottom out, they're done. So it's not that critical. You want to be able to get them out again later, and if you get them too tight, you may have difficulty. The alternating crisscross pattern is to keep the pressure even, have the thermal paste squish out in a circle from the center of the die rather than have it pressed off to one side. If we were to over tighten one side versus the other, there would be part of the die that doesn't have any paste on it. So you crisscross, take them down a turn or two at a time, alternating from corner to corner, and when it's all done, that paste is going to spread out in a circle and cover the entire die. I always use the dot in the center on a GPU with any kind of normal thermal paste. On a CPU that has no lid, like the laptop i7s, I use a line down the center lengthwise, a thin line. Don't really want to spread thermal paste because it gets air pockets and things like that. Liquid Ultra is the exception because you brush it on. So we're going to do the other GPU. Again, a very small dot in the middle. Basically the same process. Already got it clean, and we're just going to lower it down in place. Notice I'm keeping my hand grounded on the free hand, making sure that there is no static electricity. Push straight down on it. Let's go ahead and get the threads engaged on all 4 screws. So if you've never done this before, you can actually see it's pretty simple. As long as you're slow and easy and deliberate, do everything in a methodical way, there's really nothing to be afraid of or intimidated by. Just don't rush, pay attention to what you're doing, and key is to be gentle with everything. That old saying, never force it, get a bigger hammer, does not apply to computers or electronics. So we just about got these cinched up, and we're going to be ready to start reassembling this bad boy. Alright, so we've got the GPUs repasted as this painless process. CPU is pretty much the same thing. I already have Liquid Ultra on the CPU. Haswell runs really hot and it really needs the Liquid Ultra because it's a superior paste. So we're not going to do the CPU right now. Put the display hinges back in their pockets. Make sure none of our wires are pinched under anything. Hook up the LVDS cable. We'll hook up the webcam cable. Get it lined up right. Some of these things are small, so if you don't have good eyes and you're an old man like me, sometimes you need glasses and good lighting. Alright, we'll put these 3 screws back into the display hinges. Remember, these are the longer screws. I'll stand up so I can actually see down in the pockets where they go. You can see why we need a magnetic screwdriver. I can't get my fingers down in where these go, so I need that magnetic screwdriver to lower them down where they need to be. Right as you get close to the end of tightening this, you want to kind of rock the display back and forth a little bit and make sure that the hinge is seated all the way. You don't want to get the screw super tight, but by rocking that display hinge, if it's not down in the pocket all the way, it'll make sure that the screw is actually not too loose, because you don't want the display hinges shifting back and forth in the pockets, because it'll cause problems. They need to be pretty firm. But there again, the screws don't have to be super tight. You just want them snug so that you can get them out again later. Rock it a little bit and make sure they're snug. There we go. Uh-oh, I got my plastic channel guide for the antenna wires pinched between the chassis and the display hinge, so I'll loosen that screw up and lift it out of there. There we go. Tighten that screw back again. Rock the display a little bit. Now this channel guide fits into a slot that's in the right hinge. Just fit it into the slot, and then on the outer edge where the screw goes, there's a little pin that it aligns with to make sure you have it in the right spot. That holds it in place while you put the screw in. So that's all cinched up. I'm going to put our antenna wires back on. Here again, if you haven't done these before, these are tiny, so my eyes aren't that great. Sometimes I kind of fumble around with them a little bit, so bear with me. Got to tilt your head to the left a little bit and close one eye before they fit on like they should. Come on now, get on there. There we go. Make sure that they're seated all the way. Don't want them popping loose later. That one already came loose. Let's get it back on again. On the Wi-Fi card, there's a couple of triangles that are color-coded to match the wire, so you don't have to remember which wire came off of which post. I'm going to put the SLI bridge cable back in. On the right-hand side, it fits. Oops, I got to grab the wrong one. That's for the R2. On the right-hand side, there's a little slot in the hinge that the cable slides into. It's a little tricky to get the right connector on. It's got to be just in the right place. It snaps on really easy. It doesn't take a lot of pressure, but you have to have it aligned just right. If you get it right the first time, it just almost jumps on by itself, but if it's not lined up just right, you got to hold your mouth just right. And it's hard for me to see down in there because it's got a plastic base on it that kind of hides the connector. So I kind of I move it around a little bit and feel whenever the connector's engaged, and then press down. You'll know it once it's connected. You'll feel it connect, and obviously it won't move anymore once it's in there. It's a little bit easier on the left side because it's all open. It's not right next to that hinge there. So we'll go ahead and hook up the left side. Yeah, it's already on. Now the right side popped loose, so I guess I didn't have it connected. So we'll try it again. Bear with me. Sorry about this. I'll get my glasses if I can't see it any better here in a minute. All right. All right, it's time to put the palm rest back on. Make sure that wire for the wireless HD card's not in our way. Got a little pocket you can stuff it down in. We'll tilt the display back as far as it'll go till it stops, and then start the palm rest from the front edge. And as you work your way back, you'll feel the little clips snapping in along the sides and along the front. You actually hear them, they're audibly, they'll snap in. Kind of press around the edges, make sure it's snapped together real good. Got a lot of fingerprints to clean off now. You want to put your SD card blank back in. And it's on this right side. Now we're ready to put the screws back in the bottom. We'll just make sure that everything's seated, all the clips are down like they should be. We'll flip it over and button her up. And put the ribbon cables back in first. These cables have a little line on them. It's kind of a guide that lets you know that the cable's in straight. Whenever you lift up the little retainer tab that kind of hinges upward, stick the cable into the slot and you lower that little black plastic hinge down in place. The line will either be concealed or it'll be parallel with the edge of the retainer. If they're not parallel, you'll know the cable's not seated squarely and you're going to have a problem. So lift the retainer up and make sure that it's seated squarely. So that one's connected. See, there's a line that goes right along the edge there. It lines up with the connector. Gives you a good visual that they're not, out of parallel. We'll go ahead and hook up these other connectors real quick. Just flop that retainer down, kind of hinges upward. And then this third one. It's all snug. We've got these two ribbon cables over here that are for the palm rest next to the hard drives. Again, these little plastic retainers lift straight up. You slide those down into a slot. They also have a line that you can use as a guide to make sure they're seated squarely. They're a little bit tedious because they're small, and I'm trying to hold my hands in a position where you can actually see what I'm doing, but it's not really working out that well. We'll get that cable slid straight down into the slot, and then we'll push straight down on the plastic retainer, and it's good. We're going to lift up the white retainer there, and then put this little bit wider cable into that one. Push the retainer straight down, and the cable's secure now. And go ahead and put in our screw that goes underneath the hard drive caddy. Put in our screws that go underneath the battery. There's a total of 3 of those. Again, you notice I'm not cinching things down really tight. Don't do that, you'll regret it. When the screw stops turning, just make sure it's snug. They don't need to be super tight, and if you crank down on, they're not going to fall out later. If you crank down on them too hard, you're going to have trouble getting them out later. That's it for the shorter screws, and I'm going to start putting in the longer screws. They go in the 4 that are in the display hinges on the bottom, and then 3 additional screws on the rear half of the laptop there, and there. As you can see, this goes really fast. The 18 is a real dream to work on. Very simple machine to take apart. Whoops, butterfingers. If you get up, try not to get up when you're working on a computer. Wisdom would tell you that you need to use a static strap and an anti-static pad. I don't, I keep myself grounded. But if you get up and move around, it's going to build up static electricity. That's why I did it sitting down. I didn't want to get up and start shuffling around. So hinges are all tight. Got 3 more screws, and then we'll be ready to put back in the drives and the battery. Put the back cover on, and then we're done. We're almost done. I'm going slow and kind of explaining things as we go along, so as you can tell, this goes really fast. All right. Grab the hard drive that fits in the optical drive bay. It's got little ears that fit into slots in the chassis to make sure that the screw holes are aligned. You've got a little SATA cable. It's got a little tab on the edge of it. You can't really see it in this video, but if you look along the outer edge, there's a tab, and that makes sure that you have it aligned on the socket that it fits in. If you hang the tab on the outer edge of the socket and then kind of hinge it downward, it'll snap on the right way. Well, I'm kind of making a liar out of myself. It's not going on easy like it normally does. What's the deal here? Oh, wait a minute. I got it turned around backwards. The wire points towards the RAM as it comes off of the socket. It doesn't point toward the outer edge of the laptop, and I was trying to put it on backwards. They'll only go on one way. If you put it on the right way, it goes on really easy. It'll just snap right in. There we go. It's nice and snug. Drop the hard drive caddy in. Same kind of cable. It's got the little tab on the edge of it to make sure that it's aligned to the socket correctly. Kind of hang that tab on the edge of the socket and then push it straight down. It'll snap right in place. That one went on perfect, easy, the way the other one would have if I hadn't had it turned around backwards. So we'll cinch these screws down. Just snug, not super tight. Now we'll button down the third hard drive that's in the optical bay. Make sure those tabs are in the holes. And 1 down, 3 to go. Alright, let's put this battery in and then the bottom cover, and we are done. Snap that in. There's a little tab that the cable fits in behind, keep it snug. These are thin wires and they're fragile, so don't yank on them any more than you need to. Use firm but even pressure, just not force. Got 2 screws that hold the battery in. There we go. Put the rear half of the cover on. Slide it back until it locks in place. Front half of the bottom cover. Little tabs that fit in the front. That lowers down, snaps in on the sides. Got some crud from thermal paste off my fingers. We're going to have to clean up here in a bit. I dropped a screw. There we go. It's not snapped down all the way. Now it is. Remember, these are a different kind of screw. They have a finished head on them, kind of a brushed gunmetal look to it. They're not like the other screws, so you want to keep them separated. Well, there it is. The other screws will fit, but these look nice. The others are just have a satin black head on them. They won't look right in the bottom cover. So use the right screws. They're a little bit thinner pan head on them too. We are done, guys. Repaste. So let's go ahead and boot this bad boy up. Man, look at all the fingerprints and thermal paste. Got some cleaning to do, but there we go. Ready to rock and roll. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.